welcome back to the channel. Today I want to jump in and talk about extenuating circumstances. If you're new around here, my name is Caroline. I'm a senior lecturer at a UK university. I specialise in physics, so I do research and I teach in physics. Now, today's video is about extenuating circumstances. It's getting to that point in the semester where we're having coursework deadlines, we're coming into the final few weeks of teaching, then we'll have a vacation period, but then we're going to be back and the students will be tackling their examinations. And extenuating circumstances, are needed every year by a number of students. So I thought I would explain a little bit about what they are and, importantly, as an academic, how it impacts the assessments that you set for your students to take. So extenuating circumstances really are there to support students when something unexpected happens that disrupts their university study. And these aren't like, small disruptions, just, I had something minor happen in my life. These are significant things, where there's potentially been a bereavement or there has been a period of illness or something significant has impacted the student's ability to study or to be able to take or attend a coursework or an examination. Different universities will have slightly different procedures and processes. Typically universities will like students, if possible, to advise of the need for extenuating circumstances ahead of the coursework deadline or the examination, and students will be required to submit in some formal evidence into their EC, their extenuating circumstance application. Now, as a course tutor, I am not involved in deciding whether the student actually gets awarded their extenuating circumstance or not. That actually goes through a separate university panel. So I don't have the ultimate decision in deciding whether students are given extensions or ability to take their exams at a later date. You can also ask for extenuating circumstances actually within the exam itself needed. And I think most universities have a process where you can also request them after the assessment has happened, but there's some very strict criteria that means you have to follow through in that particular scenario. And students' unions and the university wellbeing centres are typically very well suited and supportive of students going through this process. Because obviously, if you're asking for an extenuating circumstance, something is happening in your personal, your private life that is going to be impacting you, and so you might be needing quite significant support. Now, if we flip this over now and look at it from the perspective of the tutor, so when you're writing your assessments, you always have to keep in the back of your mind that you need to write assessments for the main exam period, if you like, but also you need to consider what happens if students are going to be given extenuating circumstances. How would that impact your assessments? So I'll give some kind of examples. If you write an exam paper, when I write the exam paper for my modules, and quite often in my case, the exam papers are covering 70% of the module marks. When I write that exam paper, I also have to write an exam paper that could be taken at a later date by a student who is awarded extenuating circumstances. Now, often at my university, if you are unable to take the examination in the main examination period at the end of semester 1 or the end of semester 2, you will go and take your resit of the exam paper in the late summer assessment period, which I think is usually early August. So I'm writing my exam paper for the late summer assessment period at the same time as I'm writing a different exam paper for the main assessment period. And if a student is granted extenuating circumstances, that means that when they take that paper, if they're taking it in the late summer assessment period, they're still effectively taking that paper as a first attempt. So their mark isn't capped in any way. It's recognised that something impacted their studies, and essentially what you're doing is you're delaying them taking that exam paper into the summer period. So with exams, it usually is quite an easy thing to do. You are essentially just writing 2 exam papers. one for the main exam period and one for the extenuating circumstances, typically late summer assessment period. What about coursework? So coursework, laboratory work, presentation work. Now, this is a different scenario. If we're doing laboratory work, typically there is like a minimum requirement in our course that students have to undertake a certain amount of laboratories in order to be able to pass that element of the module. You'll find this if courses are accredited. So we're like accredited with the IAP, Institute of Physics. If you have accredited courses, you might need to undertake a certain number of practicals in order to be able to pass that bit of the module. So if a student has extenuating circumstances awarded, and it means they can't do a laboratory component of assessment, typically we'll have to look to make provision for that student to do that laboratory component at a later date. And so what you'll find is course tutors will build this into their module. So they might have an 11-week module running, and say in week 7, they might build in a week where students who haven't been able to undertake the laboratories in previous weeks have an opportunity, if you like, to take their experiments and do their catch-up work at that point. And obviously after the main period of this semester, you might also get these kind of periods of laboratory time within these kind of later assessment periods as well. It's all designed to allow the student to have the opportunity to get into the laboratory and take the assessment if they need to, because they were given extenuating circumstances. So, you can cope with laboratories. With essays, same kind of thing. So you might find that you set an essay exercise, and that's for the main part of your module, and most students will take that essay. Now, if students are awarded an extenuating circumstance, you might find it's acceptable for them to do that essay at a later date. So you literally give them an extension in order to hand in their essay at a later time. Sometimes, however, though, things are time sensitive and the student actually can't do the same bit of work. So sometimes the essay can only be written at a certain point based on other activities that they're working on. And if they've had extenuating circumstances, they might not have been able to do those activities to write the essay. And in that case, as a module leader, you have to make an equivalent assessment that can be taken by students who are granted extenuating circumstances, but it may not be identical to the original assessment the student was going to take. This can also happen in group work. So you might have a group work project, a team of 5 students are working on something. Now, if one student is granted extenuating circumstances, that team of students will still continue the work as a team of 4, and they will hand in their report as intended, when the deadline was due. Now, the student who had extenuating circumstances obviously now can't turn in a contribution towards a group report, because that group report has been handed in the main assessment period. So again, this is where as a module leader, you have to have an alternative assessment the student can take, which is essentially looking at evaluating the same learning outcomes, the same objectives as the first bit of coursework, but has now been adapted for students to take in this kind of later assessment period. So as a module leader, it's something we really do have to think about. You don't want to go into a module only having had prepared your main assessments, your main exams, because you might not need to have backups. You might have no students requiring extensions on their work, but you might, right? And if you have a student who requires an extended period of time, you need to know what happens. Does that student just get longer to complete that piece of work? Does that student take a different exam paper at a later time? Is there an alternative assessment? You need it laid out before the module starts. And most universities will demand that you do this. So when we are writing our assessments at university, they get moderated and checked by external examiners. And this is from a network within the university system here in the UK. And so external examiners will be looking to make sure that you have a provision here, that you've got both the main assessment and those assessments for those with extenuating circumstances both organised. I realise this is a little bit of a dry topic potentially, but I think it's really important. It's one of those things as a module leader you don't want to get caught out by. You don't want to suddenly find yourself having to write an exam paper in a few days for a student, or concocting some piece of assessment that a student can take. You sort of want to know exactly what it is before the module starts. So yeah, I would be interested in your take on extenuating circumstances. How do you go about it within your university? Do you have a procedure for how you prepare your assessments? Have you been a student who's put in for extenuating circumstances, had them granted? How do you find the whole EC, extenuating circumstance process? It's something that's really important that we have it at university. We want our students to be able to succeed in their studies, and life, sometimes we can't control everything. Things will just happen, and I think it's really important that as universities we have this framework of support to allow our students to try to deliver their best work at a timescale that works for them, but is also fair and consistent with all the other students who are turning in that work at the allotted assessment deadline. So let me know, give me a shout in the comments. How does your university handle and process, and how do you get ready for students needing extenuating circumstances? In the meantime, I hope you're having a really good week. I'm having a very busy time at the moment with research. Semester 2, I'm still teaching, but I don't teach as much in semester 2 as I do in semester 1. So it means I can get my, lock on my research grant applications, get loads of research requests in. I've been to a couple of really big conferences with thousands of people at them, so I can chat about that in a future video. But I hope you're having a really good and productive semester. I hope things are going well for you. Leave me a note. I love seeing what you're saying in the comments. If there's something in particular you want to know about academic life, just let me know. And in the meantime, look after yourselves. Have a really good week, and I will see you soon. Bye.